Thanks very much for that kind introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me here to talk today. And what I thought I'd do today is talk about research and healthcare, and hopefully give you some examples of where SAHMRI is playing a really important role in that interaction. But also, I guess, bring to your attention, and it may seem self-evident that research improves healthcare, but actually it isn't. And it isn't necessarily thought that way by a lot of funders and healthcare operations. So, but before I start, I'd also like to acknowledge that we're on Garner land today and acknowledge elders past and present. I'd like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders in the room today. So, Australia does have a leading healthcare system, but it still has its challenges, and I think almost every day in the Advertiser or the Age, we see something about the challenges of the health system, and clearly over the last few years with COVID, we've seen an enormous challenge to the health system. I guess one of the premises that I want to put forward today is that if we can embed research and innovation further into our healthcare system, we can actually have a better healthcare system. And one of the interesting facts about our healthcare system and the US and UK health system is that actually less of our healthcare delivery is optimal than we might think. So probably about 60% of what we do in our healthcare system aligns with evidence and guidelines and is optimal. There's then a significant portion that is okay, but actually is low value care, and then there's about 10% that actually is poor care or associated with harm. And so again, the more we have research embedded in our healthcare system, the more likely we're going to get that dark blue line to be bigger and the red line to be smaller. And it's very clear, if you look around the world at the very best healthcare systems, those with the most research perform the best, and that can be measured by things like survival from ovarian cancer or breast cancer or other treatments, and it can also be measured by workforce, that you retain and attract the very best workforce if you have research embedded in your healthcare. Adelaide's obviously very lucky. When we look across from Adelaide Oval, we see the biomedical precinct there. We see the fabulous Royal Adelaide Hospital, the new site for the Women's and Children's, and that's exactly why SAHMRI is there. And someone asked me, was SAHMRI the first building? And we were the first building on the precinct. Before us, there were just railway lines. And you can see the Australian Brain Centre. I'm going to talk a little bit about that right at the end. And obviously the two university buildings. So bringing all of that together and having it associated with healthcare delivery is a really important step in improving healthcare. We just talk about SAHMRI, some facts that I'm sure most of you are aware of, but we are an independent medical research institute. We're not government, we're not university, and our goal is innovation, creativity. We want to make sure that healthcare is evidence-led and that it's a collaboration between researchers and healthcare delivery. And I just have to emphasise, that might seem self-evident, but really doesn't always happen. And we want to see nationwide a push towards embedding more and more research into our healthcare. We are often called the cheese grater, and actually we previously thought we didn't want that and said no, we're not that, but actually we've just taken it on board now. So we can't fight it anymore. There's 15,000 of those triangular windows that make us look like a cheese grater, and 5,000 of them have that particular metal hood that keeps the building cool. We also have a spiral staircase in the middle that looks a bit like a DNA helix, but it actually goes the wrong way. And the other bit of neat engineering are these flower columns that are shown on the picture there. And the reason we have the flower columns, it means we don't have to have columns elsewhere in the building, so they're holding the building up. And also in terms of energy rating, we're a gold-rated energy building. So it's a fabulous building to work in, and we're obviously very proud of it. In terms of our research, I'm not going to go through this diagram for very long, but basically we go across 4 main areas: Aboriginal health equity, which is an area I know you guys are working with us on; lifelong health, which deals with all those chronic conditions, and just looking at the average age in the audience, the sort of things that everyone in this audience is probably experiencing in terms of their hips and their brain and their eyes and their hearts. So that's what lifelong health does, concentrates on those big health challenges that really challenge the sustainability of our healthcare system. We then have precision cancer medicine, and really one of the outstanding accomplishments of research, I guess, over the last 10 years is cancer. We've seen a whole lot of cancers go from fatal illnesses to controllable illnesses, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the SAHMRI Women's and Kids, which really concentrates on giving kids a healthy and early start to life, which I think we'd all acknowledge is very important. And then we have a whole lot of things we call SAHMRI Impact, where we have capacity that really builds our research. And so that capacity can either be technological, and I'll talk about that, but it can also be things like our registries. And so you may not know that we have a registry that measures every person that goes into aged care in the country. So we can measure the quality of care, the relationship between their doctors, MDS, PDS, right across the country for aged care, and a lot of that data was used in the Royal Commission on aged care. We also measure all of the renal dialysis and transplant data that's collected around the country. So that's our sort of SAHMRI impact group that really helps all of the other research to work better. Now, a couple of examples of how we work with the healthcare system. So Tim Hughes, who's the head of our precision cancer team, is also a consultant haematologist at the Royal Adelaide. And Tim has been conducting clinics and trials at SAHMRI for patients with chronic myeloid leukemia. And it's actually Tim's work in Adelaide that has led to a revolution in CML, to the point that people with CML rarely now die from that condition. They do have to take medication for the rest of their life, but it's really had a dramatic effect on that particular leukemia. We work on lots of other leukemias, but that's a great example of how his work has led to people not needing to be in hospital, staying at home on treatment. We then have the Women's and Kids team, and a couple of the really exciting developments there. So they worked out that the level of omega-3 fatty acids in your blood, so this is the sort of fatty acids you get from eating fish and walnuts and other things, can predict whether you're likely to have preterm labour. And obviously, no mother wants to deliver her baby early, because it's obviously not good for the baby, and it means the baby will be in hospital for a long time. And so now, through that research, published in journals like New England Journal of Medicine, etc., we now have the stage, by working with SA Pathology and the healthcare system, that every woman in South Australia can have this blood test, and if the blood test is low, they can have supplements, and that will then reduce the amount of preterm labour, babies born preterm in South Australia. So both obviously helps the babies, helps the families, but it also saves money. And then in our lifelong health team, we have Pete Saltis. Pete's a cardiologist at the Royal Adelaide, and he's been working with the imaging pod at SAHMRI. So in the building, in the pod that sort of sits on either side of the building, we have a nutrition pod and an imaging pod. In the imaging pod, we have the most advanced CT in the country, called a photon counting CT. And with Pete's research, that has been shown to be able to see the blockages in the heart, in the vessels going to the heart, and then working on how we get rid of those blockages and stop them from coming back. Again, those people then don't have to be in hospital. They don't come into hospital with heart attacks. They can be managed at home on medication and do very well. Another centre that we have is called the Health Policy Centre, led by Carolyn Miller. And Carolyn does work around health policy, around tobacco control, around obesity prevention and sugar. And more recently, as a lot of the people at SAHMRI did, she pivoted her work during COVID to work very closely with Nicola Spuria in terms of COVID. So we did all of the COVID modelling for South Australia and gave advice to Nicola about how to utilise that modelling, how to predict when the next peak was coming, and the things that needed to be put in place. I'm sure not all of you agree with everything that Nicola did, but I think all of us, can be very happy with the way South Australia responded to COVID. I think of all the states in the country, and probably all the countries in the world, I think South Australia did extraordinarily well. Yes, there were some things. And so that was really a team effort in terms of us providing modelling and policy advice, and obviously Nicola doing a lot of the hard yards as well. I mentioned our work in aged care, and one of the things that our data from aged care seemed to indicate was obviously the spread of COVID and other infections in aged care, and some of that has to do with the ventilation in aged care. And Geraint has developed a number of sensors that can determine not only whether a particular aged care centre has a problem, but which areas are the most at risk. So by putting these actually relatively cheap CO2 sensors in various parts of residential aged care, he's been able to determine which areas are the highest risk, and then he's currently doing a randomised controlled study, so some places are getting this and some places aren't, using UV light to kill those airborne pathogens like COVID or influenza and so on. So some really important work to improve the quality of care in aged care. And then I mentioned Aboriginal health equity. And one of the things that our Aboriginal health equity team did right at the beginning, so this was like 8 years ago, they developed the South Australian Aboriginal Health Research Accord. So basically, and Alex, who started this, I recruited Alex to Adelaide to start this, and Alex said, I'm not going to do any research, I'm going to go around and talk to everyone first, and then I'm going to decide what research to do. And so essentially what he was saying was really important to ask the communities what were the major problems that they were facing, rather than doing some academic research that wasn't solving the problems that they need to solve. And that led to the Accord, and the Accord essentially says that SAHMRI wants to improve health in Aboriginal communities, but we will do that with the communities to make sure we deal with the problems that they have, which might well be lack of dialysis in the APY lands, or it might be the lack of cardiac care in a particular community, or foot care with patients with diabetes, which are some of the areas that we've worked in. People always like shiny machines, and they are actually very important. And so I'll just take you through a few slides showing some of the technology that we have been able to bring to SAHMRI and to South Australia to enable our researchers, but more importantly, all the researchers in South Australia to work together on some really high-class technology. So the picture you see there is the cyclotron, which is in the basement of SAHMRI, and that makes radiopharmaceuticals for all of the hospitals. Every day it makes what's called FDG for the Royal Adelaide and for the other radiology services so that they can image patients with cancer. It also makes a very special one which is called PSMA, which particularly highlights prostate cancer. And that was not previously available. We're now working with companies like Clarity and Telex to develop newer, more advanced imaging agents that can be injected into people to highlight particular cancers, or as with one of our agents, and no one really wants to know this, but we'll highlight whether someone has dementia or not, so it shows the plaques in the brain in people with dementia. I mentioned our imaging in our imaging pod, so we have two of the most advanced imaging machines in the country. I should actually qualify that. The photon counting CT is the only photon counting CT in the country, the most advanced CT. and the new MRI scanner will be, but it's not here yet. So in about 2 months it will arrive. Siemens is a little bit late in delivering it, but that will be able to take pictures of the brain and show all of the connections in the brain, and obviously be very helpful in conditions like epilepsy or dementia or multiple sclerosis and those sorts of conditions. We also have a whole heap of other equipment and expertise around cryogenics, around flow cytometry, metabolomics, mass spectrometry. All would take me, another couple of talks to explain, and some of them I don't understand myself. But it is there. It's all in the building, and it all allows us to help our researchers. One of those is genomics, and I think you might have seen in the advertising today the Childhood Zero Cancer activity. That's all about the genomics of cancer and predicting the very best treatments for cancer, and that's what the South Australian Genomics Centre in our building does. Those sorts of analytics to allow us to have the most precise treatment for all of those treatments, all of those conditions. And then someone asked me, are you going to talk about the proton therapy? Yes. So you can see the building there next to SAHMRI, and if you go down North Terrace in about September of this year, October, that's exactly what it will look like. It's pretty amazing. It's already growing very quickly, and there's already some of those glass facades already on the building, but by October that building will be finished. We can't install our proton therapy centre until our proton therapy unit until the Lend Lease is finished building, because otherwise there are all sorts of potential problems. So that we'll be waiting till October, and then in October that machine that you can see there in the other photo, which is being built by Proton in Boston, will arrive and be installed. Even then it doesn't stop. It takes us almost 18 months to get that machine to the point where we're happy to direct the beam into a child or an adult. So obviously we want to be incredibly careful. We do a lot of development and testing and directing the beam into big plastic bags of water and so on to make sure that we've got it all right. But by the end of 24, the beginning of 25, we will be treating children with proton therapy. Why is that important? Well, proton therapy is a very advanced form of radiation therapy. The most important difference between the normal radiation therapy that we already have available in Adelaide is that the beam hits the cancer, kills the cancer, but doesn't kill anything else. Whereas the current treatments often cause a bit of damage around the cancer. And we often see that in people who get treatment in their pelvis, they might get inflammation in their bowel and that sort of thing. But if you think about a child with a brain cancer and a developing brain, you want to be sure that you're killing the cancer but not killing the developing brain. And we know that our current radiation leads to cognitive changes, and even as an even more stronger example is that if we're radiating a child with brain cancer, some of the radiation hits some of the bones of the skull, those bones will stop growing, and so the child will then maybe cured of their cancer, but they'll have a significant deformity, and that just illustrates the impact of the radiation on growing cells. They'll also have cognitive dysfunction, so there's a whole lot of reasons why a child, as an example, with brain cancer should be getting proton therapy. At the moment, they want that. They have to go overseas to Boston or Florida or Europe, and the treatment takes 6 to 8 weeks. So you can see that's a big deal for a young child and family who have to do that. Much better to have that treatment available in Australia. And so that is why we have led the development of proton therapy in Australia, and most importantly in South Australia. Because again, I think it's really important that we have in South Australia leadership in health and medical research. Helps us attract really good people, helps us do the best care, and then the South Australians and South Australian kids, they'll have it right here. We'll also be treating the rest of Australia. Only 10% of the children going through the proton therapy will come from South Australia to work out the population. The rest will be coming from New South Wales, Queensland, and Western Australia. But again, I think it shows our leadership in cancer care here in South Australia. So we believe that's incredibly exciting. And there you can see the inside. Obviously, that's a render that it's not actually, it doesn't look like that yet, but that's what it will look like. But on the right-hand side, you can see a picture of the bunker. That is what it looks like. That's the size of the bunker that will hold the synchrotron that produces the beam, and also the gantry that rotates the beam into exactly the right position to be directed at the cancer in the brain, the spinal cord. I should emphasise there are a whole lot of adult cancers as well. One example is left-sided breast cancer. So routine radiation on left-sided breast cancer can often damage the heart because the radiation not only hits the breast but hits the heart. Whereas with proton therapy, you only hit the breast, you don't hit the heart at all, so you don't get that heart damage. So wrapping up, again, as I mentioned, it seems self-evident that if we put research into health will be better. But actually that is not what necessarily all of our health administrators believe, it's not necessarily what all our funders believe, but it is something that we argue for all of the time, arguing both here in South Australia, but also nationally, that we need better integration of the health system with research innovation. We need to encourage clinicians to do things like PhDs. We need to encourage our doctors to develop a research career pathway because they are going to be the best doctors. And we also need to engage with consumers and communities to make sure they understand where research is going, but also that we understand what are the key issues that they are most concerned about and how can we help them with those. And I think it was evident through the Aged Care Royal Commission that aged care is something people worry about. Dementia is something people worry about. And so we spend quite a lot of time talking to consumers and communities to make sure that we're dealing with the big challenges, that worry them. And so if we can develop stronger collaboration, we can future-proof the system, we can fast-track our efforts to deal with those challenges, but importantly we can deal with some of the cost pressures, because people often think research costs money, and it does, but I think I've given you a number of examples where our research is actually saving money. So we have less babies born preterm and have to spend a lot of time in the neonatal unit. We have less people having heart attacks or having to be in hospital because of their heart problems and being able to be treated at home. The system actually works better. And so again, I'm really arguing today that here's some fabulous stuff that SAHMRI's done, but we need to keep doing it and we need to keep embedding it in the health system. Because if we just do it as an academic exercise, that's going to be great for us. We're going to write papers in Nature and New England, sorts of things we like to do, but we're not going to help the health system. And both of those things have to happen. You have to do great research, but you have to change the health system. So, thank you very much for listening to me. I hope I wasn't a bit too preachy, but these are really important issues to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. As usual, we have allowed some time for questions, which I'm sure you're going to ask. So, through the line.
Hey, well, thank you. I read an interest the other day about this Israeli scientist who's had great success with women's breast cancer by injecting and freezing the tumour. The tumour dies apparently, and the breast dissolves eventually without any of the harsh actions that we were aware of. Is that operation available in Australia or is it very developed?
I have to say, my answer is I don't think it's available in Australia. Certainly that's not an area that we're working on. But yes, it does go to that sort of precision approach. But yeah, I don't know that that's available. I think it's developmental in Israel at the moment, but not available.
Firstly, congratulations to I had absolutely no idea what was going on behind the scenes, so thank you so much for looking after us all. I'm a great fan of the cheese grater, so I'm going to put my hands up and say I love it. I also wanted to compliment the person who is going out and talking to First Nations people and working out what research they would like to be done But my question is, I have always thought, obviously wrongly, that it was a government initiative. I'd like to know where your funding comes from.
Really good question, and our fundraisers are the ones who put that slide at the beginning of my talk, because it is a problem that we have, that most people think that we are entirely funded by government, and we're not, and we are an independent company limited by guarantee. We need to, balance our books and all of those things that a normal company has to do. So our funding comes from a number of sources. We do get a little bit of money from the state government to help turn the lights on and those sort of things. But all of our research money comes from what I would call competitive research rounds, so from the NHMRC or the MRFF. And then we do have some relationships with some companies, so commercialisation obviously is an important vehicle to getting things into practice. So we work, as I mentioned, recently we signed a contract with Telex, which is an Australian company developing radiopharmaceuticals for the diagnosis of cancer, and so we're doing some work with them. And then there is a large gap, but part of that gap is filled by philanthropy. But we, to be totally honest, haven't been extraordinarily successful. For one reason, people often think that we're government, so they don't give us money. I think some of you do know Dave Sims, and we've got Dave on board to really supercharge that at the moment, and that's why there are some ads on 5AA, etc., which we got quite cheaply actually. So but that will, we hope, encourage people to think about us as a charity, and hopefully that will help that gap. Yeah.
One question,
Steve, again. I look at that, and I was born in a year when my life expectancy as a white male was 62 years. I've had a dividend for 17 years.
Yeah.
And I look at all this excitement that you're involved in, and it's all, of course, very important to people that are here. But are we approaching the asymptote of the, I suppose, the average age of the white males, as that seems to be the basis? And how much would it cost to go much further? And I think society as a whole will have to grasp that question at some point. And no doubt the health economics of it will be helped with by Florian and his colleagues.
So, a great question, and one I think we could probably debate for a number of hours, or more than a few hours, I imagine. So the first point I would make is that I do think that I know that over the last couple of years, particularly in the US, the average life expectancy has actually gone down a little bit, but that's been predominantly because of COVID. I think our medical science still has a way to go, and so I do think that average age will go up further. But I do think medical science has started to think more about quality than quantity. So I think we constantly ask ourselves the question, is this about extending life, or is this about improving quality? And so if you think about something like dementia, the goal, I think, is to improve the time that someone is cognitively functional, and perhaps even reduce the time where they have cognitive dysfunction, because that's the quality time. The second part is obviously of less quality. And that's a lot of the work we do around aged care as well. It's about how do we improve the quality rather than necessarily extend it. And I think the other conversation, and I apologise for bringing it up because it's quite controversial, it's also, how do we deal with that end stage of life? And if we do look at that, people do spend a lot of their time in hospital in the last 6 months of their life. Is that the right place for them? And should we be thinking about how do we improve the 3 or 4 years leading up to that 6 months, and then how do we shorten that 6 months? Or not necessarily shorten it, but are they in the right place? And how do we improve the quality of that 6 months? Sorry to bring this up, but these are facts. and our health system is struggling with sustainability, and there are parts of life that cost our health system most of them, and some of that is in that last period. Sorry.
Thanks, Steve. I really feel the last few comments, well, the last one will resonate with a lot of people. Thanks so much for your address today, and thanks also for your leadership over SAHMRI over the last 30 years. We're all very proud to know that SAHMRI is behind that huge program. And we wish you well in your future endeavours as well. On behalf of the club, I'd like to present you with a certificate of appreciation, and a high-tech rotary TV, very high-tech, which is lovely made by members of the Rotary Club. And thank you very much for your time.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you.